I'm Mike. I'm CEO and co-founder of Duckbill. With me is one of my colleagues, Jim Moses.
Hey, Mike.
Jim, you and I negotiate a lot of cloud contracts. You have been doing way more than me.
Lately.
You've been doing this for a much longer time than I have.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest mistakes that you found customers make when trying to negotiate these contracts, particularly with AWS, GCP, Azure?
I don't know if it's a mistake all the time. I think when you're negotiating, you have to consider the engineering side of the house as much as the commercials, right? And I think there's a tendency, because of what we do, to only focus on the commercial side of things. But when you're making a decision about, should I be multi-cloud, should I be all in, I always tell the clients, the engineering decision is actually way more important than the commercial decision. But your engineering decision will impact the commercial outcome. So if you're focused on just driving the best deal that you can get, you got to be multi-cloud. You have to be. Because otherwise,
why is that?
Because otherwise you're just asking nicely and you're hoping for the best, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to get in, AWS is who we deal with the most. AWS is very fair, right? They try to treat all their customers the same within a box, right? The only way you're going to do better than somebody else in your position is really if you introduce competitive threat, right? They're very worried about GCP, especially with the AI play. Azure is, right there as well. So there is a pressing need to have a multi-cloud presence if you want to get the best commercial result.
How do you balance that with the increased engineering complexity, though? Like, that's one of the biggest challenges I've seen with some of the customers is, yes, I could go move a workload over to GCP and that will help for the next negotiation, but now I'm running in two different places.
Yeah. And really where this plays out a lot. So the first thing you need to do is say which workloads are portable and which ones are not. Which ones can I move without significant engineering pain? And which ones really just have to stay where they are because it just is the way it is. And by the way, AWS thinks about that, right?
Yeah.
Right. They talk about what are the sticky workloads? What are the workloads that if we get this customer to use this particular service, they're not going anywhere, right? And they think about that, right?
Yeah.
As they should, right?
Do you find that some workloads are stickier than others?
Oh, for sure. Any cloud native service where there's a management layer, an automation layer, where the service is doing a lot of the thinking for you in terms of how you're provisioning, if you need an S3 bucket set up, all those types of things, those are sticky workloads because there's other things happening besides just where your data is running, right? Or where it's being pushed to.
Yeah. And there's the other side of this as well, which is that if I'm running a bunch of BigQuery, that's really sticky for GCP, and Amazon is just going to accept that they're not going to get BigQuery because they don't have a good answer for it. And likewise for DynamoDB, GCP and Azure don't have a good answer for Dynamo. So there are some workloads that are just never going to go anywhere, not without a major re-architecture.
And in the early days with Gravitron, that was the big thing, right? This is a new architecture where if our customers adopt this, it becomes really hard to re-architect because all the APIs change and all that other stuff changes. And it's more hassle than it's worth to do all that engineering work to move the workload.
What do you find are some of these services that are easiest to be portable and therefore easiest to negotiate on?
AI.
I've always found CDN as well.
Yeah.
Like the CloudFront team hates losing deals and they'll negotiate like crazy for those.
The thing with CDN that you have to think about, right? So I actually had this conversation with a client today because they're having difficulty with their CloudFront negotiation. And I said, well, do you have a relationship with Cloudflare, right? The challenge is when you use a Cloudflare and you're AWS native, you incur this additional cost to get the data to the Cloudflare endpoints, right?
Yeah.
To the edge sites.
Yeah, those origin costs can rack up.
That's right. So yeah, I think there are workloads that are more portable than others. Certainly, I had a client, I can't remember when it was, they were super focused on having everything containerized, right? Because it's like, okay, if it's containerized, I can put it on any container service and just move it.
The increase in portability with that, that's a certain strategy. Saying we're going to run absolutely everything in Kube, so everything's going to be containerized, means that theoretically I'm much more portable and could go anywhere. But the downside to that of not using the managed services is the increased operational cost of it. So now I've gone the other direction. I've optimized for commercial negotiation and commercial leverage at the expense of engineering.
And that's why I talk to my clients about the trade-off between engineering decisions and the commercial structure, right? Because if you really want to maximize your commercial structure, that's probably going to come with some engineering sacrifices in terms of concessions that you need to make to architect in a certain way. And candidly, the quality of the product that you're delivering to your customer, that our customers are delivering to their customers, might be worth the additional cost by being exclusively in one area versus another, right? So it's not a decision we can make for the customer, but they need to think through which is more important. I have a customer right now, AWS wants their very strategic workload, which was developed on GCP. And the engineering team has just said, we can't do this. We're not moving it over to AWS. Right. And that's been an engineering-led decision, and they're willing to accept the commercial repercussions of that because from an engineering perspective, they believe that architecture is best suited for GCP.
In every negotiation, maybe not every negotiation, some negotiations, there are some very fun stories. I found some negotiations they go off the rails. Or sometimes we cause them to go off the rails. Personally, one of my favorite negotiating strategies happened a few years ago where a customer was having difficulty getting Amazon to the table and to get certain concessions they wanted out of it. They wanted a certain shape of deal and Amazon wasn't having it. This is a customer spending $500 million a year, and Amazon didn't quite realize exactly how portable this workload was. So I told the customer, how quickly could you move 20% of all of your spend? And they're like, oh, we could do that this week. Great, do it right now. So we moved 20% of compute overnight. Suddenly, we had a call from Amazon in the morning saying, hi, we'd like to chat. Now they're back at the table. Turns out that strategy works equally well with Datadog. Mm-hmm. Do you have any interesting stories like that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have a customer right now, and really, they're a high spending customer, $100 million a year on AWS, right? And they could go more, and they're going to go more. They have a very aggressive growth path in front of them. And AWS just put a terrible proposal, a lazy proposal in front of them. To the point where I was like, I've never seen something this bad for a customer of your size. I've never seen something this lazy put in front of you. And so I was talking to the CTO. He said, well, we do have a relationship with Google. And I said, you need to talk to Google. You need to go have a conversation with them. And so GCP put a very kind of also lazy proposal in front of them, but they said, we'll save you 30% on whatever AWS is offering. And so we had that conversation, and I said, well, you should at least double click on that and see what they have to offer. Well, so fast forward, that was a few months ago. Fast forward to now, they've had that conversation. They've double clicked again. And now all of a sudden they're saying, we might move everything to GCP. So the CTO this week went to AWS and gave them some very candid feedback on the framework that they had received and said, listen, we're very seriously considering moving everything to Google. And the AWS rep said, give me a couple of days. We're going to give you a much better proposal.
Yeah. Funny how that happens.
It is, it's rinse and repeat. It really is. Yeah. It's unfortunate that you have to do that, but that's just the nature of the business.
Yeah. There was a time where being multi-cloud was really uncommon. Like the advice that both of us were giving people was, if you have 50 million, go all in on one provider. You're going to get the best deals. And now seemingly every customer we have seen in the past couple of years has intentionally been multi-cloud.
Yeah.
What do you think's driving that?
Yeah. Well, I think AWS, I have seen them in certain areas become less generous in terms of the discounts that they're offering. So I think that that's certainly part of it. I think they've gotten very comfortable with the leadership stake that they have. And I think Google is willing to pay for taking some of those workloads away. They're willing to do that. And I think they're getting more aggressive in doing that. I will tell you, I'm seeing many of my customers right now, and this is different than a couple of years ago. Many of my customers are negotiating GCP and AWS at the same time.
Really? Why?
because they know they can start playing one off the other, right? And they've learned, I mean, a lot of our clients, this isn't their first negotiation. It's their second, third negotiation. And they're wising up to the fact that sometimes you just have to eat it when AWS says this is what you're going to get, unless you have a chip that you can play. And Google's, Microsoft, I'd say to a lesser extent, but certainly Google is the best chip that you can play.
What do you think about negotiating leverage when you can't go multi-cloud? Like you know that you can't move the workload. Where can you find leverage after that?
Well, certainly referenceability helps. AWS really cares about telling cool stories about how they're partnering with their customers to do really neat stuff in the tech world, right? And so we have a lot of customers. When you get to that level of spend, there's usually some pretty cool angle that they have that AWS wants to talk about, right? So referenceability is a big lever.
Yeah. So by referenceability, you mean things like name and logo, or like case study, public speaking rights,
preferred cloud provider.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing preferred instance or inference provider.
Yeah, preferred inference provider. So this is a really great segue to how do you think inference in compute is changing this game? Like I've personally been seeing not a lot of GPU availability out there. So now we're seeing customers going out to neoclouds like CoreWeave and Lambda AI. That's changing things a lot. But now we've got all this inference workload too. And like that's a very different shape of workload. How are you seeing that change?
So I think there's two things, and I want to say them both quickly before I forget. The first one is availability is becoming just as important as the price that you pay, right? Just having access to certain chipsets is starting to become the priority, especially for larger AI-heavy customers that are running machine learning or whatever they're doing with those specific chipsets. Just being able to guarantee that you have access to them in large quantities is very, very important.
Yeah, so that's actually a really great point, because like we should emphasize that to say negotiating for guaranteed availability is one very specific point, which is a very different point from the price I pay for it.
That's right. Yeah. And if you're dependent on the availability of these chipsets to do the training that you're doing, to do any of the machine learning services that you're running or whatever it happens to be, you need to have them available to use. Like it doesn't matter how cheap they are if they're not available, right? So availability is becoming a primary concern as you see the shortage in the market in terms of just getting access to these chipsets. I think on the other side, though, and I'm certainly seeing this with AWS, they want you to be on Bedrock. They want, and it makes sense, right? Because I think there's, we were talking earlier about how, what's the slam dunk use case for AI right now? And it's hard to point to something definitive right now, but there's this sense that
coding assistants, like that's really the biggest one.
but there's this sense that it's critically important and that the workloads are going to follow, right? And if you look at the spend, I have a client right now, I believe they've got like a 1 year, $3 million deal, something like that with Anthropic. They're getting a discount on the tokens for that. They're ripping that up or they're about to renegotiate it, and they're going to do something like a 3-year, $50 million contract, right? So the amount of spend that these larger customers are starting to make on inference and on token consumption is skyrocketing. And it follows that products are going to emerge from that. Storage is going to emerge from that. All the other supporting infrastructure that goes along with all this code generation that's occurring is going to follow. So I think there's this sense from the hyperscalers that they've got to capture the AI workloads at any cost.
Yeah. A really interesting thing for me, I don't think we're seeing it now, but I think it's only a matter of time, which is what I've been calling like demand aggregation. So you can buy a model as a model. Opus 4.7 is available through, all these different places. Yeah. I could be paying for it through Cursor. Cursor's billing me for it directly. I could put in a Bedrock key into Cursor, and now it's piping through Bedrock, and Amazon's billing me. I could put in my Anthropic key into Cursor, and now Anthropic itself is billing me for it. And what happens when I add all of these others? Like, let's go do anti-gravity now, and like all those models. So now I can pay for one model through like 20 different places. And at some point, maybe the hyperscalers are already thinking about this. So like Vertex and Bedrock and Azure's Foundry can start to aggregate all of this. Like, you know what? Here's a Bedrock key. Run all of your token spend through us, no matter where it's coming from, and all the tools like Cursor would therefore be piping through Bedrock. And like that is an option. So now I think there's going to be very quickly hyperscalers trying to buy all of your token consumption, no matter where it's coming from, which leads into this really interesting problem of where is all my token consumption?
Yeah. Yeah. And is the pricing different depending on which one I use?
Yeah, like I could negotiate rates with Anthropic directly and then run that through Bedrock and it's going to be reflected in. Or I could negotiate with Amazon and it comes out of their margin. So that's interesting. Like,
or you can do both.
Or I could do both. So like now I have multiple points of leverage.
Yeah. Well, and we're seeing that, right? We're seeing direct deals with the frontier labs, right? With OpenAI, with Anthropic. And then we're also seeing the hyperscalers offering incentives to run that token usage through their platform. You can call it double dipping, but really, is it? I don't think so. I think the hyperscalers are limited in what they can do because it's really a third-party product that they're just porting through. Now, of course, they're revenue sharing with it, which is why they want it on their platform. If you're a customer that is sure you're going to have a certain amount of spend on Anthropic or on OpenAI or pick your LLM, why wouldn't you make a commitment there to get some discount? Which environment you run it in, well, then you have optionality, right? So what I've been talking to clients about is, make your commitment to the Anthropics of the world, the OpenAIs of the world, but be very flexible in terms of how you run it and which environment you run it. And the hyperscaler should be incentivizing you to use their platform, not forcing you to do it through a commitment.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. How do you think these the neoclouds fit into this? So companies like CoreWeave, Lambda AI, the ones that are providing just like GPUs.
It's hard to say because they're not coming up a lot in the negotiations that I'm working on. They're certainly very relevant players in terms of availability of GPU when it comes to certainly the frontier labs when they're doing their training.
We've been seeing them when the frontier labs call us looking for availability. That's where I've been seeing them come up. But I haven't really seen them come up in anywhere else, like the companies that are above the models.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. It's the frontier labs, especially when they're going from Opus 4.6 to Opus 4.7, and they're doing the training sequences, and they need massive amounts of GPU to get that done. There just isn't enough available. Even if they're going across Google, Microsoft, AWS, whoever it is, they still need supplemental, and that's where the CoreWeaves of the world are coming into play because it's just necessary.
Yeah. Switching gears a bit, we've been talking about, or sort of implying, very large customers. If I'm a customer that's spending like $1 or $2 million a year or on track to do so, I don't have a lot of the same leverage that these big boys have. Do I have any? How do I negotiate with a hyperscaler with that?
You don't have much. That's the real answer is you don't have much. But AWS has private pricing available, I think, for anybody spending more than $500K a month. I think that's the bottom tier is $500K. So if you're spending $500K a month, AWS has considered you worthy of discounting, and you should take advantage of it.
And GCP is even lower. GCP, from what I've been seeing from some of those customers, is theirs starts about $100K a month. But an interesting angle that I've also seen is GCP is more likely to run it through a reseller, whereas with AWS, it's much less common. So GCP has a very well-established reseller program. And so there's tons and tons of them out there, and they can do all those deals too. But AWS does not. AWS only has a handful.
They just want to go direct.
Right. They just want to go direct. And it's just a very different way of doing business.
Well, and I think the mindset with AWS there is if we're not direct with our customers, we don't get the insights that we need, right? They want to be on the ground level with their customers. They want to understand the workloads. And if they're handing that knowledge off to a reseller, then their sense is we can't really get in there and understand how this customer is using our stuff.
Why do you think that GCP believes differently? Like, what do you think their mindset is?
I don't know that it's necessarily, I don't know that they disagree with that. I think that, certain companies just grow up different ways and they build out a partner ecosystem for one reason or another. And that's just how they go to market. I mean, it's the depth versus breadth conversation, right? If you leverage resellers, I mean, certainly in the traditional on-premise markets, it's a breadth play, right? It's like, we can't touch all these customers that are buying one box every 3 years, right? So reseller market makes complete sense. When you can click on a website and just put your credit card in and start using it, is the reseller model as effective? I think Google maybe thinks so. AWS certainly does not think so.
Right. Yeah. So we were talking a bit ago about the most common mistakes that customers make when negotiating these hyperscaler agreements. What are the top 3 mistakes that you see customers making?
I'd say focusing on the wrong things. I see this a lot. You'll get somebody in procurement that saw a deal, in a previous life.
Right.
And
or they called their buddy and their buddy got, 35% or so they said.
Yeah. And so they saw a deal 5 years ago and they're like, well, we got that. Like, we're doubling our commitment. Why shouldn't we get that? So there's a lot of, I'd say, focusing on the wrong things. There's certain things you can negotiate with AWS. There's a lot of things that it just kind of is what it is, right? Cross-service discount being one of the primary examples.
Yeah, I see so many people just, they focus on that cross-service discount and be like, I want to maximize that, not realizing there's not a lot of room on that. And they completely forget that all the other service-specific stuff, all the credits, all the other terms, incredibly flexible.
Yeah. And they don't understand the why, right? And the thing is that cross-service discount is pretty formulaic, right? And it's formulaic for a reason. It's so that AWS can point to it and say, we are fair to all of our customers, and here's the proof. You fall into this band, this is the discount that you get. Do they make exceptions? Of course they do. Is it common? No, it's not that common. What are other things? Slowing down the process. I will use this as a general rule. If somebody else manages your calendar for you, you don't need to be on every negotiation call. In fact, you should not be on every negotiation call.
Yeah.
If you are at the point in your career where somebody has to schedule your meetings for you, you are the escalation point. You are not the weekly touch point.
If you are the executive that owns the contract, you should probably only be on the very last call, if any of them. Like, you're the person you bring in, like that executive is the person you bring in to get the deal over the line when it gets stuck. The executive shouldn't be driving the deal.
That's right. That's right. Third one, I would say, is feeling obligated to overcommit yourself and over-leverage yourself. I'm having this conversation with one customer right now who is in a shortfall position. They overcommitted on their last contract, and now they're feeling pressure to maximize their commitment again. And I had to have the conversation with them and say, guys, like, you own the commitment, right? The negotiation team that you're talking to can whisper all the sweet nothings in the world to you, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what they said. What matters is what's on your contract. And if you've extended yourself so aggressively that you're not sure that you can meet the commitment, or this is the big one, you've committed so aggressively that you've no longer left yourself room to optimize your environment, that's not a good contract. It really isn't. And I tell customers this all the time. Optimization work will save you much more money than the commercial impact of your negotiation, right? The commercial impact of your negotiation is going to be a few points of discount here or there, but optimizing can eliminate tons of waste depending on what the application is.
Yeah, and some forms of contractual terms will lock you into architectural decisions. We had a customer a while back that was very heavily dependent on a certain shape of consumption. And they found, after signing the contract, engineering team, not talking to the people who were doing the contract, the engineering team found, hey, we actually are no longer dependent on that thing. But procurement had negotiated heavily for it. And suddenly they found themselves underwater on their contract. And they weren't saving nearly what finance had projected they would, entirely because engineering changed the shape of consumption. Now, I've seen the opposite, where some customers will decide not to change the shape of consumption entirely because the contract doesn't incentivize them to, and in fact would penalize them on doing it. And man, like that's just such a crap position to be in.
Well, I've got a client right now, and they've got a SageMaker commitment. And, procurement doesn't always know what engineering's doing, right? And that's important. Side note, when you're doing these negotiations, you need procurement and you need engineering. You need both of those brains in the discussion.
Yeah, they're
right?
equal in the discussion.
And so procurement didn't actually realize that engineering was getting ready to move away from SageMaker. So they were perfectly fine with extending that commitment until engineering's like, I think about 95% of that spend's going elsewhere in the future.
Fun.
Right? So I think really giving yourself the leeway to move and optimize your environment and evolve to new technologies as they become more relevant to your business is an important consideration when you're doing your negotiation. It's all part of the demand plan.
Yeah. Well, Jim, thank you so much for taking time to chat. It's been fantastic.
I enjoyed it, Mike.